So welcome to Introduction to Web Development Lesson 4. Today we're going to cover some more CSS. And then just a reminder to please turn off your webcam so we don't see your face in the YouTube video just for privacy purposes. So let's start. So last lesson we learned about CSS. We learned that CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's used to stylize the content of a web page. Basically, we use it in conjunction with HTML to make the content look better. We learned some basic CSS syntax and selectors. And here we see some examples. Remember, there are 3 types of selectors. There's the element selector, there's the ID selector, and then there's the class selector. So the element selector targets all elements of that specification that we specified. The ID selector, we assign an ID to an element, a unique ID, and then we only target that specific element. And then the class selector, remember, we can assign a class to multiple elements, and we can target all those elements that are assigned that class. And then inside the brackets are the properties and declarations. Last lesson, we also learned how HTML and CSS colors work. So remember, we learned we can use a keyword like red or blue or orange to assign a color, or we can use RGB or RGBA values to assign a color using a color selector and to gain a custom color. And with that, we also learn how to change the color of text using the color property, and then the color of the background using the background color property. So today, we're going to start off with creating a background image. So instead of having a background color, we can have a background image. I'll just explain on the slide right now, but just please open up your repls, repl.it, because we'll be editing that in a few minutes. So how you assign a background image is first using the background image property, background-image, and then the syntax for the value is URL parentheses quotes, and then inside you have the link to the image that you want. So let's go into our repl.it. I guess I'll wait for a minute for some people to boot up. And you'll notice on my example website here, I changed the background color a little bit from last time. It's a little bit more neutral color now. But basically, like I said, we use the background image property to specify what image we want using the link. What we can do is, another thing we can do is background size property. Basically, it tells the web browser how to adjust the size, the dimensions of the image, make it smaller or bigger using a percentage, and then background repeat, making the image repeat or telling it how to repeat, and then background position, so where we place the image. So I have an example background image here. If I click on this link here, this is just an image, right? It's a gradient. We have some color here, and then some white here. So if you guys want to check out this picture, I'll just send it in the chat. So this is an image. We copy the link, and then remember we edit the background in the body. So right now it's a solid color. I'm going to comment that out so that we can replace it with an image just to demonstrate this. And we paste the image link in, and then semicolon to end it off. And then you'll notice that it's kind of the background image is in the back. It's a gradient, so it's not like a specific image like a dog or something, but it's like that. And then let's say we change the size. For example, if we change the background, or hold on, oops, to 50%, the image will be smaller. And you'll notice by default, it'll repeat. So what does that mean? By default, the image will repeat horizontally and vertically. So you'll see it repeats and then it repeats and repeats. And you'll notice that doesn't really look good. So what we can also do is we can use a background repeat property to specify how it should repeat. So for example, let's say we only want it to repeat one time at the top because this is a gradient. So we only want it to be at the top. We don't want it to repeat like this vertically. So what we can do is background repeat and then specify it as repeat X. And that tells it to repeat along the X axis, which is horizontally. And then you'll notice that once you do that, it only repeats one time at the top. And then in some cases, you might want to have a background image that repeats vertically. In that case, you just do repeat Y, and then you'll notice it does that vertically, repeats vertically. That's a very rare occasion. We usually don't have images or backgrounds that do that. And then if you want to not repeat, you can just say no, repeat, or repeat. Oops, typo. And then you see it only happens one time. But I'm just going to get rid of that example right there because, to be honest, in web design, usually we don't use images as backgrounds because most of the time in a lot of good websites, the background is usually a solid color. And as an example, for example, let's go to the website to Walmart, right? The Walmart website. If we go there, everybody knows what Walmart is, right? You see the backgrounds for the different sections are all solid white, solid blue. So usually we don't have a background image. Usually we just put a background color. And then, so the next thing I want to cover is what are called block and inline elements, this concept. Basically, we've talked about several HTML elements, right? We have the paragraph element, heading elements, IMG element for images, and then A element for hyperlinks. So basically, all these elements that we've talked about, there's two types. There is the block level elements, and then there's the inline element. So block level elements always start on a new line and take up the full width available. And most text elements like P and H1 are block level elements. So if we look at our code here, down here, this about section, right? We have an H2, a heading, a subheading, and then we have a paragraph right underneath it. And you'll notice we put the paragraph after it, and it will automatically start on a new line. That's what a block level element is. It will, basically, you can think of a block level element as they have an invisible line break before it and an invisible line break after it. So it'll also start the element after that element on a new line. And then inline elements are elements that do not start on a new line and will only take up as much width as necessary. So in block level elements, you'll notice if you open it up on a new tab, you'll notice that the text extends from the left all the way to the right, if you have that much text, of course. But inline elements only take up as much width as they need. So some examples of inline elements that we've used are the img element, and then the link, the A element, the hyperlink element. So to demonstrate what I mean by inline elements do not start on a new line, I'm going to place two inline elements, one after the other. So here we have an image. The img is an inline element, and then I'm going to place a hyperlink after it. A href equals. We have a hashtag. This link's not going to go anywhere. I'm just using it to demonstrate. So both of these are inline elements. The img is an inline element, and then the A is also an inline element. And you'll see that it doesn't go onto the next line. The link doesn't go onto the next line because both of these are inline elements. So they all stay on the same line. Now to contrast this, I'll demonstrate what a block level element does. And a block level element, for example, the P tag, right? And we say, and you put that there, and then you run it, and you'll notice that this one starts on a new line because it's a block level element. It always starts on a new line, and it has a line break before and after that element. So that's what the difference between block and inline elements are. And I have an image here with some block elements and some inline elements. Okay, I'm going to answer some questions right now. Okay, somebody is asking me if I can go to the CSS page in my REPL.it. There you go. Yeah. Oh, and then I'll replace the background color because I commented that out, and now we have this nice neutral background color. Somebody asked, how did I make that link? If you remember, we use the A element to make a link, a hyperlink, where we have this, where we want it to link to inside of the href attribute, and then the link text to be there. Somebody asked me to put back the image background. Okay, I'll demonstrate that again. So we do a background image using the background image property, and then we do URL quotes, and then the link of that image. So in this case here, and then we paste the link inside there, and then we end it off with a semicolon. And then the background image is in the background. And as always, this lesson is always posted on the YouTube channel, so you can always go back and look. And also these slides are posted too. Okay, another question. Somebody said that their background color doesn't work. Well, just make sure that if you want to do a whole background color, make sure you're doing it targeting the body element. And then you can either use a keyword or an RGB value. Okay, let's keep going. So we've talked about block and inline elements. And remember, block level elements always start on a new line and extend the whole length, the whole width of the page. And then inline, they only take up as much space as they need, and they don't start on new lines. So we know this, and then let's cover something called organizational elements once we know what block and inline elements are. So organizational elements, including there's two main types. There's div and then there's span. So what we use them for is we use them to organize and like group several elements together, so that they can be, for example, if we want different sections of a website, that's why we use organizational elements. They organizational elements themselves actually don't do anything, but we can use them to group together things and to stylize a group of elements. So let's start off with the div element. The div element is an organizational element, which is a block level element that allows us to group several elements together. So we say it's used as a container for other HTML elements. So you can see in this example here, we have a div element and then a closing div tag here, and it encloses H2, P, and P. Why do we do that? Well, because all these three elements here, they all talk about the same thing. They're part of the same section, which is, in this example, it's talking about the city of London. We have an H2 here and two Ps. And why would we want to do that? Well, because we can organize it into sections and group these together. And then from there, we can assign it, we can target it with CSS and change the properties for these. So in this example, we made this whole section, the background color black, and then the normal color, we made it white. And then they made the padding 20 pixels, which I'll explain in a few slides. So let's assign some sections to our web page. And before I do that, I'm going to replace the background color to that color. So when you look at good websites, for example, the Walmart website that I showed before, let me go back to that website, Walmart. I'm not sponsoring them or anything. I'm just using them as an example. You see they have several sections. They have like this top section, header section, and then they have this section. They have this body section here with a bunch of different buttons and stuff. And then they have a footer section where they have the ending and some links. So that's basically you have to, good website design, usually we separate different sections. So for example, let's make this section like a different section. And how do we do that? We can make it a different background color. So we want this whole, including this header 1 and this paragraph, to be in the same section. So we're going to surround it with a div element. And here it is. Let's surround it with a div. And then /div. And then let's assign it a class. And let's call it title section or title sect as the class. And what we want here is we want it to be a different color, right? So I'm going to target that in CSS title sect. or since it's a class, remember we have to have a dot here, and then we put our properties in here. So I want to make this a color, which I have in my notes here. Yeah, I'll make the background color this color be 7582, and then that'll be the color. And if you run it, it looks kind of ugly right now, but you see that this section is a different background color, and obviously you have to make it look good. So I'm going to change the color of the text too. Oh, okay. I actually wanted the color of the text to be this color, and then I wanted the background color to be another color. The background color should be 192, 192, and then 202. I just selected these colors because they're like complementary and they kind of match. So now it looks a little bit better. We have this gray background and a different color of text. And then you'll notice that, okay, even though this is a top, there's still this little bar here that's still the default background color. So how do we fix that? We can do padding 1 pixel, and I'll explain this in a few slides, and then you'll see that the website, okay, the top is this color because this whole section is enclosed in a div, and we've targeted that div to that color. And usually we use organizational elements, and usually we assign them a class or an ID so that we can target that section in our CSS and give that section a specific style. That's why we use organizational elements. Next, we have the span element. The span element is an inline organizational element, which is used as a to target a specific group of text. So since it's inline, we can put it inside of a P element, and without this inside of it becoming a new line. So we can use that to target specific text in a P element, for example. So in this example, we've targeted, we've surrounded this blue word inside of the P element, and we've made the color blue and it bold. So we usually use this only to select parts of a text. So for example, let's say I wanted to select this thing and make it orange, this word, these words here, Daniel's Animal Shelter, right here, and we can assign it a span, and I'll assign it an ID. Let's call it orange TXT, to say that it's an orange color text. And remember to always close off your tags, your elements. And then we go into the CSS file, and then we can target that span specifically. And then we can edit that thing. And let's say we'll make it orange. And then it'll be that color, orange. Okay, let's answer some questions. Somebody asked, the number list for, so this list is on the left for me inside of the middle. So make sure, if you want everything to be centered in the center, make sure when you're targeting the body element in CSS, make sure you have text align center so that all the text and the image will be centered. Okay. And then somebody wanted me to copy and paste all this CSS in here into the chat. I'll send that there. You can just copy and paste that if you missed like last class or something. And then somebody asked, when do you use the hashtag and when do you use a period? I'm assuming you mean the selector, right? So remember from last class, there are 3 types of selectors. There's an element selector in which we don't put anything in front of the selector. It's just the element name, and it will target all elements in the HTML file. We have an ID selector, which means that we assign only one element a specific unique ID. And then we can target that using the ID selector, which is we use a hashtag. And then there's a class selector, which we can assign several different elements the same class, which is we use a dot in front of the class name, and then we can target it. Okay. So let's keep going. Like I said, we can use the div and span elements to group HTML. So I've already demonstrated that with this section. I'm going to make another div section here in this about section. Like this is one section. I've separated it with line horizontal rules here. So I want to make this a different section and not make it as boring, right? So what we can do is we can assign a div here and surround this whole thing. And then what we can do is we can give this div an ID, or I'll give it a class. It's really personal preference, but I'll call it about sec, just to say that this class is targeting this about section. And then if we go in here, we can target that section using the class selector. And let's say I want to make it a different color, which I have in my notes here. Let's make the background color this color. And if we run it, okay, you'll see it looks pretty ugly right now. That's just the background color. Let's edit the inside the text color, and we'll make it RGB 133, 189, and 118. And then you'll see everything except for the orange text is a different color. Yeah, so let's keep moving with the presentation. Oh, okay. There's this video here. It's break time. Yeah, just make sure you wake up. Yeah, it's a little fun video there. So next, let's talk about the CSS Box Model. So we've talked about all this HTML and CSS. And then one concept in HTML is called the box model. Basically, all HTML elements are like boxes with several layers. And you can see in this diagram here, there are several layers. There's the content area, and then surrounding the content area is a padding, a border, and a margin. The content area is where your actual content is. So for example, that's where your text is, right? The padding is the area around your content area before a border. And then you have a border, which may or may not be invisible, that surrounds the padding and the content. And then outside of that, you have a margin, which gives you space between different elements. So for example, this P element here, if we open it up and we imagine it as a box, it would be like a box like this. And then there's a margin out here. It's pretty small, but it separates this from this text and this text. That's a spacing. So we can edit all of these content, padding, border, and margin sizes, and which we'll cover in these next few slides. So first, let's cover how do you make the content area bigger or smaller. Basically, you do that by editing the dimensions of the content area. So the height is obviously this part and the width is this part, and you can either have it be a certain amount of pixels, set it to auto, which is a default, or the percentage, which is the percentage of the whole element. And just usually we don't change this as much because what this does is it doesn't actually change the size of your text or any of that. What it does is it just changes how much background area your element takes up. So if I change it, the height and width, it'll just change the background color and stuff and maybe make it smaller, maybe make it bigger, and then constrain the amount, how much text it is. But usually we don't change that as much, at least not in the beginning. Next, we have padding, which, remember, padding is right outside of the content area. This one we do change a lot. Basically, the padding property, we use it to have space outside of the content, but before a border. And in this case, in this example, we have a visible border. You see, they changed the padding of this element so that there's more space between the actual text and then the border. So as an example, I want this background color to extend a little bit more outside. I don't want it to just end there and end right next to the text. I want it to extend a little bit more. So let's make the padding 50 pixels. And then if you run it, you'll see that, okay, there's a little bit more space in between the text and then the outside of the element. That just makes it look a little bit nicer. You can always edit it as you want based on your, what you want. It's just a design choice. And then finally, or not finally, we have borders. Basically, the CSS border property allows you to specify what a border is, how thick it is, what color it is, what kind of style it is. So we'll cover several border properties. First of which is border style, which is you define what kind of border you want. And by default, there is no border. So if you look at any of these, you don't see any physical border, right? By default. That's the default. You can also change it to all these different types. So for example, we have dots, dash, solid, double. Usually solid is just like a solid line. So as an example, I want to have a border around this H2 element here. So what I'm going to do is, since I only want it around this H2 element, I'm going to add an ID to this H2 element. Remember using the ID attribute, ID, and we'll say about header, because it's the header of the about section, and then we can target it in the CSS, right? And then we can use the border style property to assign it. Let's say we want it to be a solid. Now, if you run it, you see there's this square green colored border around it. And by default, the color is what the text is. And the next property that we can do to edit the border is, for example, we have the border width property, which tells us how thick we want this line, the border line, to be. So we can assign that by either giving a pixel value for length, for width, or we can use the keywords thin, medium, or thick, which are like set amounts of thickness for the border line. So in this example, I want it to be slightly more thick, let's say at 5 pixels. And then you can see the line has gone a few pixels more thicker. And then finally, you can change the color, border color. Personally, I like this color, so I'm gonna keep it, but you can just put whatever color you want. For example, this RGB value, or using a keyword like red, green, or blue. So I'm gonna keep the green color because I like it. Now, you'll notice one thing. The border, you would think it would like end here and then enclose the box, but because the H2 is a block element, the whole element actually extends to like here. So it takes up the whole space. And you might be wondering how we'll change that. We'll learn how to do that in next class because that's a little bit more advanced. But yeah, so that's how you change the borders. Yeah, so we're almost done. Okay, border color, I already explained that. And then finally, margins. So the margin is like a little bit space outside of the border, which is transparent. Basically, like I said, it just allows you a little bit of space in between elements or around elements. So you don't have like this text, this p text, like right under it. You want to have a little bit of breathing space so that it's easier to read. So you can edit the margins. Either what you can do is you can do shorthand, which is you just put 1 margin, and that'll be the same for all 4 sides, right? Let's say 10 pixels. And then if you run it, there's not that much difference, but if you do like 100 pixels margin, you see there's a lot more space that they kind of push out the other ones, the other elements underneath it. So that's your personal preference. You can make that bigger or smaller as you wish. I'm going to settle for 50 pixels. That looks a little bit better. Another way you can do it is you can specify which side margin. So you can either do top margin, right margin, bottom, or left margin size. And that's if you want to do that. Personally, I like this, so I'm going to keep it the way it is. And then we've finally come to the second to last slide, which is I've explained all this mostly regarding block level elements. So I've been demonstrating this on the H2 and P elements. But what about inline elements? So what happens is web browsers read like if you edit the padding, border, or margin of an element, the web browser will read that differently if you're targeting an inline element like the hyperlink, image, or bold or italicize. So there's a difference. In inline elements, there is no margin. So if we look at this diagram here again, there is no margin. That's disappeared. In addition, if you edit the size and the style of borders and padding, they'll extend out in all directions, but it won't like squeeze out the other text because there's no margin. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to make a border for this thing here. Since I've enclosed this text in a span, this text itself is now an inline element. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to add a border to it to demonstrate something. Style solid. And if we run it, you'll notice that there's a border around it, right? If we increase the padding, let's say to 10 pixels, you'll notice that the border extends out, but it just literally just goes into the surrounding text. It doesn't care if there's a text like next to it or if it's covering a text. Inline elements usually they don't automatically like push away the text or anything. It just extends like that. So just be aware of that if you're adjusting the border or the padding of an inline element. I'm going to get rid of that because that looks pretty ugly. But yeah. And so that is the end of this lesson. Next lesson, we'll cover some more advanced stuff, and then we might cover a little bit of Bootstrap. Yeah, that's all. Thanks for listening. This is the end of this lesson. You can go if you want, or if you have questions, you can stay and ask questions. Okay. So let's look at some questions here. What the? Okay. There's a lot of questions. Somebody suggested if I will post the presentation before class. That's a great idea. I'll do that so that people can follow along on the presentation while I'm presenting, so I don't need to keep on going back and forth. Somebody asked, can a div be inside a span element? Well, I'm not sure like what you mean by that, because usually for span, my computer's lagging a little bit right now. Usually for span, you just enclose a little bit of text. What? I'm sorry, my computer's lagging right now. Okay. Hold on, let me plug in the charger. Okay. Still lagging. Yeah, so usually I don't see any purpose in doing that. I'm not sure what would happen because I've never tried it before, but there's like I mean, you can try it yourself, but there's no purpose in doing it. Okay, I got a lot of questions about how do you make the link, this URL, different URL or without REPL.co. So for example, google.com, right? We want it to have .com instead of REPL.co. So that's, when you're actually making a website, like professionally, when you want to like make a website, a blog or something, and you don't want it to be like this ugly link here, usually what you'll do is you'll buy a domain name. So you'll buy a link from an online website like GoDaddy. They sell those, and usually you rent it per year, and you pay a certain amount of money per year to own the rights to that URL. So you have to pay money for that, and then you can get a custom domain. Somebody said that the text in my list items are centered, but the bullet points are still to the left. I'm not sure how to answer that question, but if you send me an email with like the question and like an image or something, what it looks like, I can see, I'll try to answer it and get back to you on that. Because I can't see what your code is, and I'm not sure like exactly what you mean. Somebody asked, when is class over? The class, technically, it's already over. It's just Q&A right now. So if you have to go somewhere, you can just leave. It's that's all for today. So the class is over right now. Okay, how do you do the div? So I'm gonna repeat myself how to use a div. So the div, remember, is a block level element where usually we surround it, we make it, use it to surround several elements inside to make a section. So in this example, we've surrounded an H2, a P, H3, and a list. And then usually we target it by assigning it a class or an ID, and then in the style.css file, we can target that entire section. Okay, it seems like there's no question. So I'll post the homework soon, like in a few minutes, and then I'll also post the slides. And if you have any more questions, as always, you can email me at Daniel Zeng at alphademic.org.